Welcome back to Analysis, where we've been looking at the ongoing crisis in Syria. As the Syrian civil war moves into its fourth year, citizen reporters have filled the gap left by professionals denied access to the most dangerous country in the world for working journalists. To discuss the role of citizen journalism in Syria, I've got Hassan Ibrahim, editor and chief of the Global Arab Network here, and with me Victoria Britton, former associate editor of The Guardian. And on Skype we're joined by Rana, whose full name I can't use for safety reasons, from the citizen journalist Shamray News Network. And on the phone we're joined by Jason Stern from the Committee to Protect Journalists. We will also be joined during the discussion by Firas Fayyad from Sutaraya Radio, an opposition radio station based in Turkey. But first of all, let's take a look at this report.
On the 21st of August, the world woke up to news of an attack in the suburbs of Damascus. It was the infamous chemical weapons offensive on Ghouta. No foreign correspondents were there. All the images came from activists and citizen journalists. As gaining access into Syria becomes increasingly difficult, the world has come to rely on citizen journalists to provide images from the Syrian conflict. The Sham News Network is one of the leading groups to aggregate photos and videos taken by citizen journalists in Syria and broadcast them to the world using online and social media platforms.
In the beginning, a couple of activists, they were, reporting what's going on and putting on Facebook. And later on, it developed to have about, right now we have about 56 correspondents in Syria. The main objective is to carry on and record the truth about this revolution and what, the people of Syria.
A group of Syrian self-styled filmmakers is now looking to show a different narrative to the conflict, one which focuses on the daily struggles of ordinary Syrians. I caught up with Sharif Kiwan, spokesperson for the Abu Nadara Collective, at the London Human Rights Film Festival to discuss some of these issues.
We tried to show the countershot to the armed conflict that is the main focal point of the media. We try to show Syrians, ordinary people, not heroes or victims, not Alawite and Sunnites. We just want to show the context and to give the viewer the possibility to ask himself questions.
According to statistics from Reporters Without Borders, over 100 journalists have died since the beginning of the Syrian conflict, making Syria the most dangerous place in the world to be a journalist at present.
Not only have they traditionally been under threat by the government, now they're also under threat by some extremist armed opposition groups that control certain areas and do not want the world to talk about their own abuse of people.
In Syria, the regime has blocked many websites, including Facebook and YouTube, as this has largely provided an outlet for the opposition to express their resistance. The young men and women part of Abu Nadara work anonymously to avoid reprisals and have found innovative ways to make their voices heard.
We try to build characters. So when we show a victim like Zena, for example, actually, we could focus on her legs. She lost her two legs. We focus on her smile, because when you, viewer, you see the smile of a victim, you feel her humanity better than when you see her body demeaned.
Documenting the conflict is not only a priority for journalists, but also a necessity for NGOs and human rights organizations.
There are individual stories of people who are disappeared, who are detained, who live under siege, who do not have access to humanitarian aid, who can't go to school anymore. These are all stories that we as a human rights organization want to focus on, want to highlight in the prospect of, in the future, holding perpetrators of abuse accountable.
Despite the many difficulties on the ground, what Syrian journalists fear most is the gradual loss of interest by foreign audiences.
As media people trying to highlight the devastation, the plight, the level of violations in Syria without contributing to what today has become viewer fatigue.
As reporting on Syria becomes increasingly difficult and audiences start to become desensitized, many Syrians are losing hope for a better future. Flaminia Giambalvo, Islam Channel.
Well, following that report, let me just go first of all to Rana, whose website was featured in that report. Do you think, Rana, that citizen journalism can replace what establishment media outlets would have reported, or do you think it's just a question of doing what you can in the absence of anything else?
Well, I trust that they are doing a great job, despite the fact that they lack a lot of equipment or sometimes the connection, but they're doing a marvelous job on how they're transferring to the whole world the picture, the true picture in there. So I believe that they are able to, they're capable of, despite all the obstacles that they're facing.
Okay, Victoria, I mean, there's a case in point actually to do with Syria right at the moment, isn't there? Because the reportage, which was citizen journalist reportage of the chemical attack, has now been challenged by Seymour Hersh, the American writer, who's looked at the sources and say, no, actually, what seemed so real and so present because it was immediacy, maybe that isn't the full story. He's suggesting that perhaps the arms were got to rebel units not used by the government, and since this was almost the excuse for a military attack on Syria, it's quite a big thing, isn't it?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think that when you're talking about these citizen journalists and filmmakers and so on, I mean, their bravery and their ability to witness is fantastic, and I think all journalists really pay homage to them. But I think we have to differentiate between witnessing and showing what's on the ground and making an analysis of what it all means. And I think the great importance of the Seymour Hersh analysis, this is somebody with 40 years of investigative journalism from revealing the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, whose cultivation of sources is something that you don't get with except for 40 years of doing that kind of work. And I think the seriousness of his report on the role of Erdogan and the British Porton Down saying that actually this gas did not come from the regime, that this is an immensely important thing. I was completely shocked that the New York Times, 2 days after when it reported the latest gassing, made no reference to that. They just reported the August thing as though everybody knew it had been done by the rebels. And that, I think, both illustrates the carelessness of some big hotshot media reporting, like the New York Times, against what somebody very experienced and with a lot of time to work on one aspect of it, the kind of context it can give, is absolutely invaluable. And I don't think the citizen journalists doing their bit on the ground are going to contest the importance of having that too. Because you cannot, as we all know, I mean, I've reported so many wars, you're in one place, you see one reality, you witness that and you want to show that to the world. You cannot explain from right inside it the wider picture of what is going on.
Jason, what's your take on this? I mean, how big a part of the picture are we missing when you don't get the kind of media opportunities or the possibility of major media representatives being on the ground? Jason?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Yeah, I think first of all, in the past decade, you've seen a real democratization of journalism, where never before has it been so easy for people to collect, produce, and disseminate the news. And that's exactly what we're seeing in Syria. All you need is really an iPhone and a YouTube channel. And so on one hand, you've never had a conflict with so much footage and so much raw material coming out of the country, thanks to all the citizen and freelance journalists in the country. But what those news reports don't have, though, is the context of what happened before the camera was turned on, what happened right after, who are the actors involved, the issue of verification, all these sorts of things. And I think when you have a healthy free news environment, you really see the citizen journalists and the mainstream media working together to try and determine what exactly is happening in the country.
Rana, did you think that do you feel that that the immediacy is that you're seeing, that you're reporting? How aware do you think that your reporters are that this can only ever be part of the story, although sometimes it feels like the most important part of the story?
The reporters usually, what they take pictures, videos, and they do their reporting right away. So it's an immediate. It's like I was in contact with one of them during the chemical attack, and he was describing step by step what was going on.
Hassan, do you think that the thing that we're missing here really is that context is always king, that the facts can often be the reverse of how they appear when the full context is provided, and that can only really be provided by a journalist who's working in the way that Seymour Hersh is, which isn't to say necessarily a major media outlet, because quite a lot of journalists, as we know, don't work that way.
Right. There is 2 points actually here. The citizen journalists, especially in Syria, we did not have any choice. They had to replace the professional journalists. Not because there is options, but this is the only way to take the information. In terms of Hersh article and analysis on Syria, I do disagree with many things he mentioned, that he want to refer that the opposition had part of these things, and he considered it was just instant information flowing from Syria, and then there is a decision taken by the international community. It wasn't like that. The United Nations sent delegation to Syria, investigated these images, these facts. They got samples from there, from the bodies, from the earth, from everywhere, and they confirmed there was attack. And later on, the further investigation showed that the opposition doesn't have the means to launch such attack. So this is just to clarify that I disagree with Hersh. He's got a lot of experience, but he relied on not credible sources when he relied on what's called, the Russian information and the Russian intelligence information. Mainly he used it to give this analysis. Back to the citizen journalists in Syria. Yes, they lack the qualifications. They lack in terms of taking the journalism ethics. But at the another hand, with the time, many of them, I witnessed it personally with them. I've managed to train some of these activists who were at the beginning, their hope, it was just activism job. It's just to transfer this information to the mainstream media and put it in the hand of the professional to tackle it and analyze it and present it in a professional manner. But with that time, we are entering the 4th year. Some of them managed to, get the experience, try to get it more perfect, more or less in a professional way, in terms of when he started understanding there is ethics in this job. Is not just about propaganda machine or any things like that. So some of them managed to become like in the writing in some Arab journalist newspaper, and in some of them are speaking to Arab media and to the international media, and able to take it as much as possible, credible, to transfer what's happening there in very professional way as much as possible.
We've got a chance now to speak to Faris Fayad, who's based in Turkey. Faris, do you think that's something that's perhaps beginning to happen in your experience, that people who are starting out as citizen journalists, in a way, are now beginning to are doing it so regularly that they're now beginning to take on some of the kind of mental equipment and ways of working that professional journalists have? Faris, can you hear me? Well, Victoria, let me put that to you. Do you think that Syria is an exceptional circumstance because, as Hassan was saying, there really wasn't the choice. But in most circumstances now, there seems to be a kind of symbiotic relationship developing between the people who are doing it on the ground and the professional journalists. It's changed the business on both sides, hasn't it?
Completely. I mean, the internet has completely changed it. And as I said, the bravery of these people who are risking their lives all the time inside the country is something that, you absolutely can't do without. But I think that at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself as a journalist, what are we doing by reporting this stuff? And I wanted to refer to this very detailed report from Amnesty focusing on Yarmouk. And I happen to know the person who did the interviews with Yarmouk, which were all done on Skype or by phone, people still in there and people who've left. And the detailed material that comes out of this, which shows war crimes by not only the regime, but also by the members of the other side. And it goes on to say that this kind of information gives the international community the way to bring war crimes indictments against these people and allows one to move forward to feel that with all this information, the international community, which has been so hopeless in many, many ways, although the on-the-ground UNRWA and others, I think, have done, again, heroic jobs. But we have to move beyond just witnessing day after day after day of horror and death to how are people going to be held accountable? And in a sense, it's that kind of detailed work that this reporter has done and that Hirsch himself has done, which will in the end bring the international community to be able to hold people to account for this.
Well, I think we've got Faris back on the line now. So just let me put the question to you that I was trying to get through on the line before. In your experience, do you think that some of the citizen journalists are now beginning to take on board the kind of techniques that were previously thought to be simply part of the professional world and are beginning to operate more like that? Hello? No, I'm afraid that isn't going to happen. Let me ask you about that. Do you think that's beginning to happen now?
Actually, we witnessed such thing happening. Many of these activists who started trying to get more professional training on journalism, we witnessed several people like Firas, I think, and others who launched some websites, some radio station. Some of them tried to produce some professional videos as well and broadcasting through mainstream media like probably Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya. I noticed some of them they relied, in somehow mainly on such in the beginning of the revolution on such activists who become more and more moving toward to become a citizen journalist and then professional journalists. And obviously, as Victoria mentioned, they are doing not just a media work; they are as well documenting crimes. They are offering the world some information and sources could be used one day if there is any international court to take and look at who committed any crime, whether the regime or some extremists who hijacked the revolution and tried to suppress these citizen journalists. The importance of such citizen journalists, we can see it when the regime target them. According to the Reporters Without Borders, around 80% of the journalists killed in Syria are 80% of them are citizen journalists. They were the eye of the revolution. They transferring everything happening. So the regime was targeting them, and they were paying the price twice than any protester or any opposition in there. So they are doing several jobs, media, documenting crimes, and sometimes they are doing humanitarian assistance. They are helping some besieged city, so they are working in several fronts.
Jason, do you think that we've seen a kind of the kind of technological revolution here that perhaps we haven't seen since the widespread use of the printing press? I mean, I'm thinking this kind of journalism is simply impossible not only without the social media, but in reality, it's pretty unthinkable without the smartphone, without the picture of the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing, though, is right now we have a new model of journalism, this 21st century model. But in Syria, we see what happens when this new model comes headfirst into a brutal civil war. And and the result is a devastating effect on journalism. In terms of the number of killed, it's the second deadliest conflict CPJ has recorded. We've had 80 abductions, more than 80 abductions of journalists, of which at least 25 journalists are still missing. In terms of the number of imprisoned journalists, all of these things are at least partially a result of this new model of journalism coming headfirst into a deadly conflict. And, one of the things about the citizen journalists, they don't have the training, they don't have the equipment, they don't have the support of the big media organizations. They're certainly more at risk. But one thing that's the same, since the Committee to Protect Journalists has been documenting the deaths of journalists since 1992, everywhere in the world, the brunt of the risks are faced by local journalists. And in fact, in Syria, we see 90% of the journalists killed are local journalists. That's the same in every country. So even though for everything that's new and dangerous about Syria, that one trend is exactly the same, which is that local journalists face the most risks in any conflict or any country that they cover.
Victoria, just to sort of correct the balance, we've been saying, that perhaps citizen journalists, however valuable what they do is, can't see the whole context. That's what proper journalism does. But lots of big news organisations don't do that, do they?
Absolutely.
The Rebecca Brooks trial is going on as we speak, and there's the resources of a major news organisation used for anything but this purpose.
Yeah, there's absolutely no doubt that what we call mainstream journalism has been exposed as in many ways extremely debased. But I think that most of the serious war correspondents that I've ever worked in Africa and in Vietnam and other places, were very serious people who really tried to give that kind of context. But then, unfortunately, when the Americans started this practice of embedding journalists with them in Iraq, which was a kind of way of covering up American and British crimes, I think we saw a debasing and a laziness among some, not all by any means, some mainstream journalism, which in a way has opened the door to the kind of citizen journalists who's saying, we can actually do it. We can show you what it's really like, which in Iraq, there was much less of that than there should have been. And the bringing people to account for some of the crimes that the Americans committed would have been much more speedy had you had this same kind of citizen journalism and smartphone media and all of that.
Okay.
So it's much to be welcomed.
Okay. Well, on that note, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it because we've run out of time for this episode of Analysis. But do rejoin us for future episodes where we'll be tracking the future developments in the Syrian revolution and all the important international stories. But thanks for watching. Okay.